Okay, now I'd like to talk to you about the storyline of Dracula. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the story, and if you want to get some of the movies and watch the Dracula movies, you can watch the 1931 movie with Bela. In fact, by the way, this is Bela Lugosi. This is made by Royal Bobbles. It's their newest one. They actually come out with several new ones, and this is a new one. I wasn't going to buy this one. In fact, when they came out, I thought this was really cool, but I wasn't going to buy it because, I mean, what would I do with Dracula? I mean, I'm not collecting the Bobbles as a collection, although some people think that I have a collection, but they're all in boxes. But I was collecting the Bobbles for these shows. Then I decided to do Dracula, and then I remembered that Royal Bobbles makes a Dracula. In fact, they're brand new. So I went online and I ordered a Dracula. Anyway, he's really cool. He's Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi was in the original movie, which, by the way, a little trivia here, and that is that when Bela Lugosi died, he was buried in his Dracula cape and outfit, which I thought was pretty cool. So you won't find it in the Smithsonian. You'll have to dig up Bela Lugosi to see his cape. I wanted to go over the storyline of Dracula. Now, Dracula itself, let me set Bela Lugosi aside. Dracula itself, the way it was written was very interesting in that it's a series of letters and journals and logs and telegrams. It's a collection of these things. So it's not your typical story of once upon a time there was a guy named Dracula and blah, 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 blah. It is like reading a series of letters. I have all of the letters that I collected from World War II. And so if you read all of these letters, it tells the story of what we did during the war. So in the same sense, this is the way Dracula is written, which is a very unique style. To compare it to films today, it would be like watching that movie, I can't remember what it is now, but it's the film about the monster that comes to New York and everything is shot with somebody's video camera. So you're not seeing it like a film that was shot. It's from just the viewpoint of like the Blair Witch Project, which is done with a shaky camera. I don't necessarily appreciate those kind of films because after a while you get nauseous of watching the film jiggle back and forth. I'd like just a straightforward film, just like I'm doing here. But it does make a very good novel to read it, to write it in that form. Okay, the story of Dracula. I'm not going to go through all the story for you. You can go watch one of the movies or you can read the book yourself. That would be good. I have the audio book too, so I've been listening to it. Audible does a fantastic audio book, and they have different characters reading the different parts of the book, the different journals and letters and telegrams. The book basically runs like this. Dracula invites this attorney, this young attorney. In those days, they didn't call them attorneys. They called them solicitors. And he invites this attorney to come and basically consult him at his castle in Transylvania because he's planning to relocate to London. And his whole goal is really to bring this fellow over from London and learn all that he can from him because Dracula doesn't get out much, and try and, because he doesn't necessarily want to kill him right off the bat, but he wants to drain him of all of his knowledge and so he spends lots of time talking to him and serving him dinner. And one aspect I like about it is that after every dinner they have a cigar. Actually, Dracula doesn't smoke. Dracula doesn't eat. If you ask me, if I didn't have any appetite to eat and I wasn't interested in smoking cigars, immortality would be kind of a drag. But he spends a lot of time interviewing this attorney and finding out all that he can, and also having the attorney make arrangements for him whenever he is planning his move to London. So eventually the Count moves to London and the guy gets left behind in the castle, and then the story moves to a set of diaries between two women, and they write about what's going on in their life, and one of them suffers from sleepwalking, and eventually she meets up with Dracula. He starts to transform her into a vampire. As again, I'm not going to go through the entire story, just going to kind of give you the lay of the land. After, this girl's name is Lucy, after she dies, and I'm not giving away too much in the story because a lot of you have already seen Dracula, but after she dies, that's when they bring in other characters, and they bring in Dr. Van Helsing, who later on in other movies and books is portrayed as a vampire hunter. First off, they hunt down all of the coffins that he's brought over, and the coffins have this special holy earth from Transylvania, and Dracula has to lay in this earth during the daylight so that he can recuperate, you might say. Well, they try to spoil all of these coffins, and eventually they defeat Dracula. I'm not going to go into the end of the story because just in case you do want to read the book or watch the movies, I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen it. But the point is that Dracula is actually a tragedy. It's not a horror film. It's not a horror film in the sense of like The Walking Dead. Well, The Walking Dead is actually a film, a parody of the Black Plague. And that would be a great show, and I plan to do something on it. In fact, I really do plan to do that one too. But Dracula is not necessarily a horror film. Dracula is, in my opinion, a tragedy. So you see, Dracula lives forever. Dracula is immortal. The tragedy of Dracula is that he's outlived his time. We all experience this if we live long enough, in that people who are very old, they outlive the time that they enjoyed the most. Dracula in the book, when he's talking to Jonathan Harker, which is the first guy, the attorney that he's talking to, the attorney notes in his journal that Dracula talks about these battles and these times with all of this flavor as if he was there, which he actually was there, but Jonathan Harker doesn't realize that, because he doesn't realize that Dracula is immortal. But the thing is, Dracula is living in the past. He's constantly, they talk about how decadent the castle is, and how much the spider webs and the dust and all of this beautiful furniture, but it's just sitting in dust and mold and mildew. That's a representation of the fact that Dracula has outlived his time. When you outlive your time, that means that you've outlived the music of your time, the dress and the fashion of your time, the novels and novelties of your time, and you outlive your peers. And even though there's new music and new fashion and new peers, but they're not your peers, you still are part of that period of time that's earliest in your life. That's your time. And so when you've outlived that time, you're constantly reflecting about the time that you miss, the time that you would like to get back to. Dracula is trapped as an immortal. He's trapped living forever into the future. As I explained before with my little explanation of living on the island with the little people and killing them, he doesn't value the humans that are here now. He greatly values the humans that existed during his time, but he's outlived them all. He's outlived everything of his time. This is the tragedy of Dracula. He is living in a living hell. He's living as a prisoner in the future. Dracula, no matter how long he lives, no matter how much wealth he accumulates, no matter how much knowledge he gains, Dracula will never, ever achieve happiness. And this is why Dracula is, well, we see him as evil because he kills people, because we have an opposite view of his view of life and the value of it. Dracula is doing whatever he can, in a sense, to get back to where he feels comfortable with, but he can never return. He can never return to the past any more than we can, even though he's immortal and he can do all of these things, and he can gain vast amounts of wealth and knowledge and travel and have lots and lots of people around him if he wants. He can never get back to the time that he's most comfortable with. He can never get back to that time of his youth, the time that was his time. And that is the tragedy of Dracula. But Dracula is definitely a different genre of horror. But is it horror? I mean, I tend to think that it's more of a tragedy, but it's the horror of what it's like to live an immortal life. And if you look at Dracula very carefully and you study it, you'll see the pros and cons to the immortality. Dracula is a tragic figure because he is immortal. He is that very thing that we all want to achieve, though most of us through the presence of God. But Dracula is able to obtain immortality on earth. And so you get to see the demise of a man who is stuck between heaven and hell in his own living earthly purgatory. And that is Dracula, a tragedy, not necessarily a horror. But there are aspects of it that are very horrifying. So I hope that you look at it a different way. I hope that you read the novel and watch the films too. The films are fun.